So welcome to Cultivating Character. It's a study of Pirkei Avos. Can everyone hear me okay, first of all? Yeah, it's clear? Okay. I want to point out that right now, I see some of you are muted, others of you are not. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to jump in and share your question or comment. If you're on the phone, you can do that by pressing *6. If you're in the if you're on the app, obviously you can unmute yourself on the app. So Pirkei Avos is called the Ethics of the Fathers. It's or another in translation of the word Pirkei Avos is primary ethics, or ethical principles. In the laws of Shabbos, for example, we have 39 avos malachos, 39 principal categories of labor or of creative activity. So here, Pirkei Avos might also mean guiding principles. So today we're going to be looking at chapter 6, and the reason we're doing chapter 6 today is because it's customary to learn Pirkei Avos every Shabbos, every Shabbos afternoon, between Pesach and Shavuos, which is 6 Shabboses between Pesach and Shavuos, and then many continue throughout the summer as well to going through it each week. And this week, most of us will be studying Perek 6. So that's the 6th chapter. Actually, the 6th chapter of Pirkei Avos is an addendum to Pirkei Avos, because originally the Pirkei Avos comprised of 5 chapters, and when the custom developed to study Pirkei Avos on the 6 weeks between Pesach and Shavuos, a 6th chapter, which comprises of teachings of the Mishnah sages, was kind of incorporated into the study chapter and has kind of become the part of the Pirkei Avos, seen as part of the Pirkei Avos. Actually, if you look at the very beginning of chapter 6, we're not going to do the entire chapter. We're just going to select a Mishnah to study. If you look at the first chapter, it says, our sages taught in the language of the Mishnah, which implies that these are sort of teachings which were outside of the Mishnah, but outside of the formal text of the Mishnah, but that are kind of considered part of Mishnah teaching. So the Mishnah today, I'm going to share the screen, and you can see the and you can read the Mishnah for yourself, and we'll read it together. So you see the Mishnah on your screen, I hope. Is it clear? Are you able to read it? All right. Maybe I'll zoom in a little bit. Okay. Chamisha kinyonim konalo HaKadosh Baruch Hu ba'olamo. 5 acquisitions that God acquired in his world. These are they. Torah is 1 acquisition. Heaven and earth are 1 acquisition. Avraham is 1 acquisition. The people of Israel are one acquisition, and the Holy Temple is one acquisition. 5 things that God calls his acquisition: the Torah, heaven and earth, Abraham, the people of Israel, and the Holy Temple. So, what do we mean when we say acquisition? And the Mishnah continues to bring verses to explain this word acquisition, or actually to refer to where did we get this idea that these particular things are considered God's acquisition. So he brings verses: the people of Israel, as it is written, until your nation, O God, will pass, this nation which you have acquired. And it says, the holy ones, the noble ones, in whom is all my delight. The Holy Temple, as it says, the base for your dwelling that you, God, have achieved, that your hands have established. And the word there, established, in Hebrew is the same as kinyan, acquisition. And it says he brought them to his holy domain, this mount his right hand has acquired. So, and I missed the first 2. The Torah, God acquired me, heaven and earth. The heaven is my throne, the earth is my footstool. You have made them all with wisdom. The earth is filled with your acquisitions. So, it's an interesting word, acquisition, and actually, I think that the word acquisition, kinyan, is a mistranslation, and not to say that it's entirely inaccurate, but that it doesn't really capture the full depth of the meaning of the word. Now, there is another place in Jewish teaching that the word acquisition, kinyan, appears. Well, I'll use the Hebrew word kinyan to avoid misunderstanding. Kinyan is used in the context of marriage, a relationship formed between a husband and wife. And it's because of this word kinyan that many people erroneously, mistakenly point to the Jewish practice around marriage as though in Judaism the man buys the woman, which is completely false. And this Mishnah is proof that that's false. Because when we use the word kinyan as though someone purchases something that didn't belong to them before and belongs to them now, this Mishnah says that God has acquired this world. How can we say that God acquired this world as though it didn't belong to him before and it belongs to him now? Furthermore, the Torah, right? The Torah is something that didn't belong to God before and belongs to him now. That's highly irregular. Abraham, God created Abraham. What do we mean that God acquired him? God didn't purchase Abraham. And here again, the exact same word kinyan is used in the which can be translated acquired, but doesn't really mean acquired, as we clearly see. So, what then does have you? By the way, just as a just in curiosity, have you heard this idea that people refer to the Jewish marriage ceremony that the man buys the woman?
Well, does it come from liknot?
What's that?
Does it come from liknot?
Yes.
So that means to buy.
It does. So absolutely, I can see how the mistake comes, because there are words that have multiple meanings. In this context, it's impossible to translate the word kinyan as to purchase, because God doesn't need to purchase anything. And similarly, in the marriage ceremony, the man is not purchasing the woman. I would say rather that when we say purchase in English, it means something specific. It refers to the transaction and it refers to the domination. When you buy something, you own it and control it. Whereas that's the meaning of the English word purchase, so that you can do anything that you want with it. But the Hebrew sensibility around the word liknot doesn't mean that you can do anything that you want with it. That isn't the connotation of the word. It has a different sense, and the meaning of the word liknot is to establish a relationship with. That's actually the meaning of the word, and it means an important relationship, something that you're willing to sacrifice for. And then we have, of course, the kinyan refers to the specific act that signifies the start of that relationship, but it also indicates that the person has given something, has sacrificed, has that it's meaningful, and they didn't just wander into it, that they were intentional about it. And that's more captures the larger sensibility around the word kinyan, and it also it makes more sense now why we would refer to marriage as a kinyan, because that's exactly what it is. It is a man doing something that is not natural for him, to declare his intent to make one woman special in his life, to have a monogamous relationship with her, to sacrifice for that relationship, and that it starts from this moment on. So that's it says that we now have a singular important bond. Another example of this term kinyan is used in common vernacular, where we where a person, let's say when a person finishes studying the Talmud, we would call it, they were koinashas. They have acquired the Talmud. And this, obviously, they purchased it before. That's not it. But by spending so much time over it and learning it, they can say that they now have a full relationship with it, having learned through the whole thing. Right? You can't do anything with the Talmud now that you know it. Right? It doesn't imply control or dominance or anything like that. And I want to point to another text. This is from this text is a record of a conversation between Avraham and Eliezer. Avraham has said to his servant Eliezer, saying, in Genesis 24:3, he says, he refers to God as the God of the heavens and the God of the earth. Right, it's a common phrase, the God of the heavens and the earth. 4 verses later, Avraham speaks about where he came from. He says, God of the heavens. So the rabbis ask, why does Avraham refer to God of the heavens and not God of the earth? So Rashi, the one of the foremost commentators on the Torah, explains, and I'll share the text with you. He says, the reason why earlier God referred to the God of the heaven and the earth is because now, at this point in time, he is God of the heaven and the earth, because I have made him familiar in the mouths of people. I have taught the world about God. And so people know him. But when he took me from my father's house, he was the God of the heavens, but not God of the earth, because mankind did not acknowledge him and his name was not familiar on the earth. So when we refer to God being having a kinyan with heaven and earth, we're saying a much more significant point than just saying the world belongs to God. Because, of course, Abraham explains that it's possible for God to be everywhere, but for it not to be his. What makes God, God of the heaven and earth, versus God only of the heaven? It is, do the people on earth acknowledge God's presence? Do they recognize that God is there? And so Abraham, so we could say that, and here we understand the connection between God and between Abraham and the heaven and earth. This explains why God would say, I have 5 acquisitions, 5 kinyans, not kinyans, but 5 special relationships. I have a relationship with heaven and earth. How did I get this relationship, this heaven and earth relationship? It was through Abraham. Because until Abraham came along and taught people to really respect the heaven and the earth, to be cognizant of the presence of God on earth, God didn't have a special relationship with the earth. Because the nature of the way God made the earth is that people have, for better or worse, the ability to think independently. And so it required someone to teach people to be aware of the presence of God so that this could be a relationship. And here is the other aspect of the relationship, which is, and again, going back to this misnomer around marriage, the meaning of a relationship is that it's a two-way street. A person can't marry, as in Jewish law anyway, a man can't marry a woman who doesn't agree to marry the man. And so this relationship, you can buy something without it wanting to be bought, right? You buy a new refrigerator, the refrigerator didn't ask to be bought, right? But when you form a relationship with a life partner, with a spouse, that person has to agree to it. And the heaven and earth analogy is important because the heaven has no independent thought. It's completely connected with God. And so in that dimension, we would say, of course, God is the God of the heaven. But on earth, since the earth has independent thought, it won't be in a relationship with God until it wants to be in a relationship with God, until it agrees to be in a relationship with God. And this is the work of Abraham, that he taught people to be aware of the presence of God in their lives. This also, this is kind of along the similar lines, the famous story of the Kotzker Rebbe, the great 18th and early 19th century Hasidic Rebbe, who once stormed out of his room and demanded of his Hasidim who were there in the study hall. He said, "Where is God? Tell me, where is God?" And the Hasidim tried to answer, "Everywhere." Or others said, "In the Holy Land, it's in the Torah, in heaven." none of these answers satisfied the Kotzker Rebbe. He kept on demanding, where is God? I want to know where is God. Finally, they exhausted all their theories, and the Rebbe said, you wanted me to tell you where is God? God is wherever you let him in. This also explains the proof that the Mishnah brings, the scriptural text that the Mishnah brings regarding Abraham's status as God's acquisition. Let's go back to the text of the Mishnah. Where's my share screen here? He said, Avraham, as it is written, he blessed him and said, that is Malki Tzedek, the high priest of Jerusalem at the time, blessed Avraham and said, blessed be Avram to God Most High, acquirer of heaven and earth. Avraham, at first glance, this text seems to be saying that God is the acquirer of heaven and earth. How does this indicate that Avram is the acquisition of God, or that Avram has a special relationship with God? So the Rebbe explains that this verse is teaching us that it was due to Avram's efforts that God could be called the acquirer of heaven and earth. It is Avram who introduced the awareness of God to the world. So if Avram was the cause for the entire world becoming God's kinyan, having a relationship with God, so then Avram himself is one of God's choice kinyanim, a component of God's creation that now belongs to God in a deeper, more significant way. It is Avram who caused God to be the acquirer of heaven and earth, and therefore he is the first kinyan of God on earth, because he is the leader of God's having that relationship with earth as well as heaven. And if we look at the other things that the Mishnah refers to as being God's kinyan, remember, let's look at them here. The 5 kinyanim are Torah, heaven and earth, Avram, the people of Israel, the Jewish people, and the Holy Temple, right? So all of these are things that really represent a special relationship between, that represent the special connection or connector between God and the world. The Torah makes God's world more than just a thing, but something that relates with God. The Torah is like a key to helping the world manifest God's presence. It's a map for this kinyan, for this relationship. We might say then, rather that the Torah is a book of rules, we would say that the Torah is a relationship guide. It's a manual of how the world and God might have a connection. Especially when we look at the word mitzvah, as in the Kabbalistic translation, mitzvah means commandment, but in the Kabbalistic translation, we say a mitzvah means a connection. The Hebrew root of that is tzevet, which means a group of people. Tzavta is a bundle. And so we will say that the Mishnah, the mitzvah is something that bundles us together with God. And so in that sense, the entire Torah is a connection guide. When we talk about heaven and earth, let's try and just analyze a little bit deeper why we refer to heaven and earth as being God's kinyan, as having a special relationship with God. When we refer to heaven and earth, the symbolism of the words heaven and earth implies that there is heaven, the spiritual meaning behind the universe, and earth refers to the laws of nature, the natural order of the world. And in this sense, both our search for meaning represents a relationship key between us and God, but the really unique idea of this teaching is that the earth, the natural order of things, also applies to also is a relationship key in connecting us with God. So I want to understand this a little better. Let's turn to the Mishnah, or rather the Talmud, Jerusalem Talmud, where we have an interesting argument between two schools of thought. We have Beit Shammai, the school of Shammai, who teaches that the heavens were created first and then the earth. And he brings a text saying, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, which applies that earth was created before. The school of Hillel says, the earth was created first and then the heavens, as it says, on the day that God Almighty made the earth and the heavens. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says, I wonder why they argue. I say that the earth and the heavens were created together like a pot with its cover. So what are they arguing about? Who cares what was created first, the earth or the heaven? And so what they might be arguing over is what really should be our first thing that we look at in this world. What has priority? And so the school of Shammai says the heavens have priority. Our spiritual pursuit, our meaning orientation is the first and primary pursuit and sensibility. Meaning comes before everything. Spirituality first. The school of Hillel says, no, the physical world is primal. We should look first at what matters is not why you did things. If you focus, let's put it this way, if you focus too much on meaning, we become obsessed, we become caught up with why you do things, how important was it to you, how meaningful was it, how fulfilling was it. The school of Hillel says that's not the right attitude. Those things are good, but what matters most is what did you actually do? Because this is the physical world. And what matters is your black and white actions, not your rhetoric, not your opinions, not your, not how fulfilled you were by it. Beit Hillel would say, this world is about helping people, not about caring for them. You understand the difference? Beit Shammai says, let's train ourselves to care about people, and then we'll help them. Beit Hillel says, no, go out and help them, and hopefully you'll develop a sense of caring for them as well. It matters what you do, not how much you cared about it. And ultimately, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the author of the Zohar, the great teacher of Kabbalah, says that actually, no, they're a set. Each one requires the other. And just like a pot, you can't cook. There are certain foods that can't be cooked without a pot. And some foods that you could put them in the pot and you cook them, but if you don't put the cover on top, it'll burn, it won't cook properly. And so you have to have them both, the pot and the cover. Or, as in the Mishnahs, if we look at the words that the Mishnah says regarding heaven and earth, he says, heaven and earth, let me get to this thing here. Heaven and earth, as it is written, so says God, the heaven is my throne and the earth is my footstool. Which says that just like a throne and a footstool come together, so too heaven and earth come together. It also explains, by the way, why the Mishnah refers to both heaven and earth being one acquisition. It's not that God acquired the heaven and then he acquired the earth. And I remember that when we use the word acquisition, we're using it in the incorrect sense. We mean has a special relationship. There's one relationship that God has with both heaven and earth. And God can't have a full relationship with the earth without having the heaven. Meaning we can't relate to God through our physical experience without also having a meaning and spiritual sensibility. And we can't have a spiritual and meaning relationship with God without also having a practical and physical aspect to that relationship. A fundamental idea in Hasidic teaching is that the different parts of Torah are interconnected. The Torah contains stories, laws, psychological insights, mystical ideas, but these are just different ways of saying the same truth. They're all mirroring each other. And that's why we'll find the details in a biblical story corresponding to the details of a moral teaching, and also having a legal ruling corresponding to it, and a mystical teaching behind all of it. It's all just different words to express the same idea. I'll give you an example. Reb Shmelka of Nikolsburg was a great Hasidic teacher, and he taught, he explained this text, famous text in the Talmud, tractate Kiddushin, that says as follows. He says, a father is obligated to do the following for his son. He's required to bring him to a bris milah, to circumcise him. If he's a firstborn, he's required to redeem him, to redeem the firstborn, pidyon haben. He's required to teach him Torah. He's required to help him get married, to find a wife for him, and to teach him a trade. So Reb Shmelka explains that these 5 obligations of a father to his son are corresponding to the 5 special relationships that God has with the world. The first is circumcision. So we know, of course, the first person to circumcise himself was Avraham. And therefore, and that really manifests a very special relationship with God. Avraham is bringing God into the most intimate aspect of his life and making a mark on his own flesh of his relationship with God. And this is the relationship with Avraham. Um, to redeem him corresponds to God's redemption of the children of Israel from Egypt, which created the nation of Israel. To teach him Torah, as we said, this other special relationship that God has is with the Torah. So that one's clear. To find him a wife corresponds to the special relationship that we said is the Holy Temple. Because the Holy Temple is kind of like the home that we go into to be together with God. And so it describes kind of the chuppah, the marriage place where we have that relationship. And to teach him a trade corresponds to heaven and earth. That is the natural order that sustains everything. So what is the practical teaching in this Mishnah that I think we can all look at? Let's focus on these 5 aspects of our life that we all experience, and rather than seeing them as just being there, really focus on being conscious and intentional in our relationship with God. Realize that we have these special opportunities to connect in a real and meaningful and actual way with God. Heaven and earth. We pursue meaning, and we recognize that the natural order of things is also an opportunity for us to be aware of the presence of God in our lives. There's a story going around the internet. I don't know if it's true, but it's a very special, it represents a very special idea. There was a man who was sick in the hospital with the corona, and he was Baruch Hashem, he recovered. Thank God. And afterwards, they gave him the bill. He looks at the bill and he starts crying. And they said to him, if it's too expensive, we have charity care. We can help you pay the bill. He says, no, that's not the problem. I can pay the bill. Why are you crying? He said, I'm crying because I see that it's $1,000 a day for the ventilator. He says, every day of my life, I've been breathing. And I never appreciated how much that's worth. How special it is that that I could just take a breath, and I have this gift of breathing, and I had this, and I took it for granted. And so, in this sense, the physical characteristic of just being able to breathe, again, just a practical and natural manifestation is a way in which we can be aware of our relationship with God. And then we have the second one, which is Avraham. And so Avraham again represents the circumcision connection, or what Avraham taught is that we can make habits and we can ingrain God in our lives. The heaven and earth is God's relating to us, the gifts that God gives us of spiritual insight and of natural beauty and gifts. Avraham says we can turn back to God and make space for him in our lives. And so we can create habits around our faith. We can teach our children about our faith. We can encourage other people to be mindful and aware of God's presence in the world. One of the ways we can do that, by the way, is by saying, thank God. When somebody asks me, how am I doing? I say, I'm doing great, thank God. And I don't pay attention to whether the person is religious, not religious, whether they're an atheist or not. It's important to manifest and express our belief in the existence of God and our gratitude for the existence of God. So that's the second one. The Torah. Remember, this is, I think, another very important teaching, that rather than seeing the Torah, as we said, as a book of rules or abstract teaching or nice ideas or interesting concepts, see the Torah as a manual for a relationship with God, as a key to understanding, a map to building a strong connection in our life with Hashem. Finally, the next one is the people of Israel. Okay, so this also is our Avram refers to the individual, personal connection that a person has with God. The people of Israel refers to our communal identity and relationship with God. And to see that, for example, standing in solidarity with our fellow Jews and being identifying as a Jew, participating in Jewish community is another important way in which we create a special relationship with God. And the last one is the Holy Temple, the Beis HaMikdash. And in our time, the Beis HaMikdash is the synagogue, an actual physical place dedicated to making space for God. But in the larger sense, all of us are called to make our homes into a sanctuary for God. And especially in this time where still many people are advised not to go to shul because they're supposed to avoid contact with others, how much more so that we want to take this principle of making physical space for God in our world. And some of the ways we can do that is, of course, by putting a mezuzah on our door. That's obvious. Having Jewish books in our home. Having a space in our home that we dedicate for prayer. This is my prayer corner in my house. Having a tzedakah pushka, a charity box in our home. And actually, the Rebbe recommended that we shouldn't just have a charity box in the home. It should actually be attached to the wall so that the structure of the house becomes identified with our principles, becomes identified with our relationship with God, our community, and our work in life. So that's one thing that we can. So again, we have heaven and earth, our pursuit of meaning, and the natural gifts that God gave us. We have our journey through life and our developing our personal connection with God. We have our communal connection with God, and we have our physical space connection. How have we changed the physical world to manifest, to represent our relationship with Hashem? So that's all I have to say for today. Thank you for joining us. Any questions, comments, or thoughts? I'd love to hear you.
Well, you know what? Okay. Hello? You see me?
Yes.
So I always have this issue when it says, like God, has a feeling towards this and that, but the Jewish people, but what about the whole rest of the world? like we're such a tiny, tiny minority, and I know we're the chosen people. But when you
Hmm.
look at it, it's like, and I know every religion, like to the Christians, they'll say, well, for those of us that believe in Jesus, we believe in Jesus, and they don't believe in Jesus. You know what I mean? So it's
Right.
like, that's how I feel when sometimes if you say like, oh, just the Jewish people, like
Right.
you said, what you say, Abraham, Beit HaMikdash, the heavens and the earth, whatever.
Right.
Only the Jewish people, but what about all the other people that he created?
That's an excellent question. I'm so glad you asked that. And I would point out, not to be, I want to say that I don't believe in Jewish exceptionalism as a principle. By contrast, um, many denominations of Christianity do believe that the only way to relate to God is through Jesus. We don't believe that, right? So what do we mean when we say we have a special relationship with God? And I think actually this uh, subject that we've been discussing, relationships, is a perfect example. When we say that we have a special relationship with God, um, we can look at, I don't want to use the relationship of husband and wife because that is exclusive. Let's talk about the relationship between parent and children. Do you have siblings?
Yeah.
You do, right? So you have siblings. At the same time, so each of you have your own relationship with your parents, or had your own relationship with your parents. Um, the worst thing you can do in that relationship is look at how your brother or sister relates to your parents. Oh, for example, I have a sister who loves to cook for my father, right? That's their relationship, and that's the uh, fabric of their relationship. I'm not a cook. If I'm gonna go now and go home and start trying to cook for my father, um, I'll be taking away my sister's relationship with him, and I will be ignoring some of the special things that I share with my father. My father and I talk philosophy, right? So if instead of talking philosophy with my father, I start cooking with him, then I miss the important, unique connection that I have with him. So as a Jew, uh, I believe, are called to focus on what is the special relationship that we have with God. Not to say that nobody else can have a relationship with God, but there's the only thing that matters. We're not here, and again, Torah, this is a very important guiding principle to everything. Torah doesn't mean scripture. Torah means teaching. And so what matters is what you can put to use. What's going to change my life? So what's going to change my life is not analyzing, discussing the fact that all people can have a relationship with God. It's a truism, but that's not actionable. What's actionable is what is unique to me in my relationship with God. And all of these, the 5 kinyonim that we described, are individual steps in our national story. So if a person, and I'll give you an example. We spoke about the idea of redemption. Um, we are required to look in our own lives, and for example, Passover is a Jewish holiday. The reason we don't um, proselytize Judaism to the nations of the world is because if they would become Jewish and start observing Passover, it's not necessarily their story. It's not meaningful to them. It's our,
Converted,
what's that?
if they had the desire to convert,
Oh, so I'll talk in a moment about conversion, but I'm saying, why don't we uh, advocate the world observing Passover? Because it's our story, and we are looking at an occurrence that happened in our lives, and 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 seeing how that has shaped the unique and personal relationship that we have with God. Now, what is someone saying if they want to convert? They're saying, I have been inspired by Jewish people and by Jewish teaching, and I'm joining the family of the Jewish people, and I'm choosing to see the story of Exodus from Egypt as meaningful to me. Kind of like, I'll give you an example. If a family adopts a child, right? Now, that adopted child becomes a part of the family, and everything that happens in that family affects that child. And so, for example, if that family comes from Holocaust survivors, if that adopted child says, I don't care about the Holocaust, that's a problem. As becoming adopted in a family means that the story of the family, I identify with that story, right? So that's not something that you can impose on someone, but it is something that someone can choose. So when we talk about the unique Jewish relationship, we're not saying that it's the only way to relate to God, but we are saying that it's the right way for Jews to relate to God, because it's authentic to our experience, to our heritage, and to our identity. And to look at other ways that other people relate to God kind of it distracts from who we are. It appropriates someone else's experience and takes their bandwidth away and actually disadvantages us because we have much more effective ways of relating, which are more real to us. Does that answer your question, Donna?
Because you say there's 5 things, and then you say like the heaven and the earth, Abraham, what, Beit HaMikdash?
Yeah.
So it's like these are like the principles, or these are the. But to me, it would be like the relationship to the Jews. To me, it would be like the world, the relationship to. I know I have a different kind of sort of orientation.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you at all. I don't disagree with you at all. I think, but I think the
because
difference.
Everyone is created in God's image, and
that's right.
I know we have a special, some kind of
no, I disagree.
special, but like special
Donna,
to be
I disagree with you
persecuted.
there.
It's special to be persecuted, but
No, I disagree with you. I don't think that we are special. I disagree with you. I think it's wrong to say that the Jewish people are special.
Chosen.
I don't agree with that either.
Really?
Yeah.
Isn't it in the Torah?
Well,
Segula? I don't know.
Yes. So I'll explain to you what that means to me. It doesn't mean that we're special. Chosen actually means not special. If I offer you ice cream or chicken soup, or a better example, if I offer you ice cream or mayonnaise, which one would you eat?
Ice cream.
You'll eat ice cream. Did you choose the ice cream? No, the mayonnaise isn't an option. The only time we say chose is to say that really the choices are completely equal. But I selected this one for completely arbitrary reasons. So when we say the Jewish people are chosen, we're not saying we're special. What we're saying is that what has happened to us was divinely ordained by God. And it doesn't mean we're special, but it does mean that we're called to react to this, to not see it as accidental, but to see it as intentional by God. God knows that this is where we are and wants us to be here and wants us to do something about it. But it doesn't mean that we're better. Now, when the Mishnah says God has 5 special relationships in his world, again, I think that it's really important that we remember that these Mishnahs are not truths, they're teachings. And so when we talk about relationships, the only relationship that matters is the relationships that we have. And so an Indian person might have their 5 special relationships with God, and it might start with heaven and earth, and it might go to something else. And they have to be authentic to their journey. But going back to the example of a parent and child, I could say that that my relationship with my father is one of the most special relationships that I could have. And that doesn't take away from the fact that my sister has a relationship with my father. If I say, all the children in our family have a good relationship with my father, that's not a meaning statement. That's not a teaching. That's not a life-orienting idea. You know what I mean? You understand the difference between a life guiding principle and a kind of abstract fact? Right? It's an abstract fact that my father has.
They say you shouldn't have a favorite child.
That's exactly right. But when I'm with my father, I feel like his favorite child, and that's good. And that's the way I should feel, right? Because all that matters to me in that moment is being with my father. So I believe, and I think that it's as a psychologist, as a therapist, we really want to focus on the what's real to me and not what's objectively true, right? This is, I think, the difference between when we talk about all people being important to God. That's an objective truth, right? But that's not what's real to me. I'm not saying that it's that I don't care about the fact that God is important to all people. Yeah, but that's not a guiding principle for me. My guiding principle
for me, it is. Like I always found in Judaism, Orthodox, it's this thing that it's very nice. We have a nice relationship. What about like we're such a tiny drop.
I think
the whole
that,
world and everyone,
Donna, I
and
think
they
it's
all
important.
have souls and intelligence. Like
Donna,
what about?
No one ever, I didn't say.
They have 7 mitzvot only. That's it. We have 613. You do your 7, because you don't need to do so much because
that's a good question, but I don't think it's relevant. The more mitzvahs doesn't mean better. Okay, it just means that we know exactly what we're supposed to do, and we don't busy ourselves with exactly what they're supposed to do. We don't believe we're better. We don't believe we're more important. At the same time, we are supposed to believe that as a psychologically healthy person should believe that the only decisions that matter in their lives are their own decisions. If a person sits with you in a therapy session and starts talking about all the bad decisions that somebody else made and all the relationships that they have, you'll say, come on, let's not bring somebody in the room who's not in the room. The only people in the room right now are you and me. So let's talk about what's going on with you. Let's talk about the decisions that you made. Let's talk about the experiences that you're having. And so this is why Judaism is focused on Jews. And it can sound like you're being exceptional. It can sound like you're saying that Jews are more important. And it's not saying that Jews are more important. It's just saying that it's rude and arrogant for us to talk about the relationship that other nations have with God. Because it's not relevant to us, it's not our business. It's their business. What matters to us, the only thing we should focus on is our personal relationship with God, and to us, that's the most important thing. And part of that relationship means...
I would always, I would go to people's homes, they'd always be, oh, the Goyim are so bad. They'd say they were really religious Jews.
Well, you have
And I used to think,
ignorant,
what?
ignorant bigots. Ignorant bigots. I
You're
don't.
gonna
I don't
lump
feel the need.
everyone together and say they're all bad. Yeah, there's bad, but there's
That's not. That's see. The thing is, Donna. That's not Judaism speaking. You have to find a text in the Torah that says something like that. Because the fact is, if you go to any, it's a natural tribal mentality. If you sit among black people, you'll hear them talking about how white people are bad. If you sit among Swedish people, you'll hear them talking about how Norwegians are bad. If you sit among, you sit among Iranians, you'll hear them talking about how the Turkish are bad. It's a that's tribal. That's tribal behavior. It's not that's not Judaism behavior. That's what you'll hear when you talk to Jews. And you know what? If you sit among Republicans, you'll hear them talk about how Democrats are bad. You hear them sit around Democrats, you hear them talk about how Republicans are bad. That's, you know what I mean?
I do, but I did hear it a lot, often.
Because you lived around Jews, so you'll hear Jews talking about Goyim. But if you would have lived in another society, you would hear different talk. Listen, I lived in England, right? They made fun of the Irish.
Oxford?
They talked all about the Irish.
Wait, did you go to Oxford?
No, I didn't go to Oxford.
Oh, that's where Muli Boteach, Rabbi Boteach went there.
Yes, he did. I lived in England, and they talked all about the Irish. Americans don't know about the Irish, right? For us, Irish is St. Patrick's Day.
In England?
Yeah. For us, Irish is St. Patrick's Day, and green and leprechauns.
Yeah,
and for the English, Irish is stupid, and is terrorism. So when you don't
like
live,
Arabs and Israel, yeah.
Right. So if you live around Orthodox Jews, you'll hear their tribal talk. And what Torah really comes to do is and the more Torah oriented a person is, the less bigoted they'll be. Because you can't believe in the soul and you can't believe in God and be a bigot.
Well, that's good to know.
Right? If God creates if you really believe, and you spent an hour a day meditating on how God created the entire world and all the people in it, then how can you be a bigot?
That's what I didn't like,
Yeah.
But they do say thank you. I mean, I don't want to but they say thank you for not making me a woman. They say thank you for not making me a boy. I know there's the whole,
I think that it's I think that we can an example of that is I would thank God for my male privilege. Right? So it's not appropriate to thank God for my male privilege, but I am grateful. I am grateful that I don't suffer the way women suffer. And I'm grateful for the spiritual insights that I've been given. I'm grateful to not be ignorant of the spiritual insights that I've been given. So I don't think that that's saying, if anything, if a person says, thank you, God, for not making me a woman, it'll make him more sensitive. It'll make him more sensitive to women. So I think that if you would talk about those people, if you go back to those people who talk about the Goyim, you'll probably also find that they talk during davening. They talk during services, right? That's the kind of, those two things usually go together. They're not deeply spiritual people. They're not deeply religious people. They're people who identify tribally as Jewish.
Okay.
And that's going to be the way they behave. So I'm trying to push us to be identifying spiritually and religiously with Torah and with Judaism, and not just tribal identity.
Sounds good. Great class.
Thank you so much for joining. Thank you for challenging me with good questions. I love it.
Okay, great. See you next week.
All righty. Same bat time, same bat station.